The Goody Side of the Goody-Naughty book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Goody-Naughty book by Sarah Corey Rippey. The Goody Side. Honor Bright, President. When Honor Bright went to live in the country, the very first thing he asked for was some real live geese to join the chickens and the pussy and the rabbits already on the farm. "Will you remember to feed them every day, son, if I get you a pair?" asked his father. "Yes, papa," said the little boy. "Honor Bright." When he promised Honor Bright, he always kept his word, and he said Honor Bright so many times a day that finally Honor Bright became his name. "Quack, quack!" cried Mr. and Mrs. Goose the day Honor Bright's father brought them home. "What a fine place!" "Isn't it?" said Mother Hen. "And just wait till you know Honor Bright." "Just wait," echoed the Rabbit Gray family and Mr. T. Cat. Honor Bright was as good as his word, and the geese grew fatter and fatter and fatter. "Good morning, Mr. T. Cat," cried Mr. and Mrs. Goose early one morning. "Had your breakfast?" "Of course," answered Mr. T. Cat. "Honor Bright always feeds me the very first thing." "You must be mistaken," cried Mr. and Mrs. Goose. "Honor Bright always feeds us first." "But Honor Bright gives my children their breakfast very early," cackled Mother Hen. "Well," squeaked Father Rabbit Gray, "we've all had breakfast, and that's the main thing. Now let's make Honor Bright president, because he's so good. That's the way people do, you know." Just then Honor Bright came out. "Hail, President Honor Bright!" they all cried. Honor Bright thought they said, "I love you," and really it meant the same thing. Rose Red and Ruthie. It was Rosemary's mother who named her Rose Red. Rose Reddy it was at first, because Rosemary was always ready to help. Then it became just Rose Red for short. Rose Red had much of the sweetness of her name flower, and few of the thorns. That is why, when Ruthie slapped her, Rose Red didn't slap back, but she came home crying. Rose Red's mamma gathered her up in her arms and comforted her. "Ruthie's probably sorry now, dear," she said. "Perhaps she will tell you so by and by. Will my little girl be Rose Reddy if she does?" "Rose Reddy for what, mamma?" Rose Red sat up and dried her eyes. "Rose Reddy to forgive." Rose Red nodded. "I think I'll gather the posies now," was all she said. Every day Rose Red cut fresh flowers in the garden and arranged them for the house. It was the one thing in all the world she liked best to do. The roses she always left till the last, for dessert, she explained. "Roses, dear," she said, as she tucked them one by one into their special bowl, "what would you do if your best friend slapped you?" Just then a thorn pricked Rose Red's finger. "You'd prick her, would you?" Rose Red laughed. "That's because you are only a rose and don't know any better. It wouldn't be nice for a little girl to prick. I do know something better." Rose Red chose 6 of the finest roses and carefully clipped off all their thorns. Then she ran to the gate between her yard and Ruthie's and slipped them into a covered box beside it. This box was Rose Red's and Ruthie's post office. Nearly every day something went into it from one little girl to the other. 4 o'clock was mail time. Postman Rose Red hid behind a bush and watched. Presently Postman Ruthie came down the path. She opened the box and took out the fragrant letter. Then she laid something inside, drew down the cover, and ran back. It was Postman Rose Red's turn now to open the box. Her letter was a real one. It said, "I'm sorry." Rose Ready to Forgive flew through the gate. "Ruthie, Ruthie," she called. And then Rose Red kissed Ruthie, and Ruthie kissed Rose Red. And that was the last of Ruthie Ready to Slap. The Tree Game. When Margaret and Benjy were getting over the measles, their mamma invented a new game to amuse them. "You might play you are trees," she suggested. "I'm a pine tree," cried Margaret. "So am I," agreed Benjy. "Pine trees sing, you know, Benjy," Margaret went on, "so we must sing, too." And the two struck up a lively tune. Toodle-dee, toodle-dee-doo. It was not the pine trees, however, that sang it. "Oh, an organ man! Oh, a monkey!" And both little pine trees raced to the window. The organ man smiled. "Dance, Tessa, dance!" he cried to his little girl, grinding away with all his might. And then how Tessa's little brown legs did flash back and forth, and in and out, and what funny tricks the wee monkey did. When the music stopped, Jocko scrambled up to the window and politely presented a cup to the trees. "Pennies, please," the funny, wizened little face seemed to beg. The pine trees brought their banks and shook the pennies out, one by one, into the cup. Then the biggest pine tree thought of something. "Wait a minute," she cried, and disappeared. When she came back, she carried 2 plump bananas. "Here," she said, handing them out through the window. Tessa smiled her thanks politely, but Jocko just fell to munching greedily. The pine trees hung out of the window and watched Tessa and her father and Jocko as they went off down the street. Finally the biggest pine tree turned to the littlest pine tree. "I'm not a pine tree any longer, Benjy," she announced. "I'd rather be the kind that gives something. I'm a banana tree now." "So am I," echoed Benjy. Billy Boy's Magic Key. Billy Boy had a magic key. He carried it in his face. There was a secret about this key. It always opened doors into pleasant things. His mamma had taught him that. Billy Boy was playing in the yard one day when his mamma came to the door. Billy Boy," she called, "I want you to do some errands for me." When Billy Boy hurried up to the steps, his mamma handed him 2 baskets. "One is to carry the groceries I've ordered, Billy Boy," she said, "and there's a cake for Mrs. Thomas in the other. You can leave it on the way to the store." Billy Boy's face clouded. I'd rather not go there, Mamma," he said. "Mrs. Thomas is so cross. That's what the boys say." "That's because they tease her cat, Billy Boy. Remember about the key, and you'll be all right." Billy Boy picked up his baskets and marched off. Pretty soon, thump, 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 went Mrs. Thomas's brass knocker. The door flew open. "No," said Mrs. Thomas's loud voice, "I don't want—" Then she stopped. Billy Boy was using his magic key. "I'm Mrs. Sheldon's little boy," explained Billy Boy, pulling off his cap. "Mamma sent you a cake." Mrs. Thomas just could not resist that key. "Thank you, child," she said, smiling and lifting out the cake. "Wait a minute," as Billy started down the steps. She plunged her hand deep down in her pocket and drew out a bright new nickel. "Here," she said, "buy some candy." The nickel was clutched tightly in Billy Boy's hand when he reached home. "Look what she gave me," he cried, "and she wasn't a bit cross. It must have been 'count of the key." And the magic key? Why, it was Billy Boy's own sunny smile, to be sure. Polly's New April Fool. "You're losing your hair ribbon, Polly," remarked the twins, as their sister sat down to breakfast one 1st of April morning. Polly hastily felt of her head. "April Fool! April Fool! April Fool!" shrieked the twins joyously, pounding on the table. Polly glared at them. It was raining, and Polly, who hated rain, never could take a joke on a rainy day. "You're a pair of very rude boys," she said. "Nobody but horrid, rough boys like you would ever think April Fool's any fun." And she sulked through her breakfast without another word. But Helen was different. Helen liked rain. Moreover, she didn't in the least mind being fooled, and she laughed just as hard as anybody when she put salt on her mush instead of sugar. When she went upstairs to put their room in order, however, the room she and Polly shared, the steady drip, drip, drip of the rain made her remember Polly's unhappiness, and it troubled her. A robin, singing his rain song in the tree outside, cocked his head saucily as Helen went to the window. "Help her, cheer her, help her, cheer her," sang Mr. Redbreast over and over again as he swung on the dripping branches. "That's a good idea, Mr. Redbreast," Helen answered. "I'm sure she needs it, but how shall I do it?" Mr. Redbreast winked wisely. "You'll find a way, a way, a way," he trilled.